It's good to speak about Russia, and I'd like to make two general points. One is connected with a huge number of different myths about Russia, mysterious Russian soul, and Russian history. And there is a good expression in Russian that Russia is the country with unpredictable history. And history all the time is revised, is rewritten, and Nina did show this pretty well. So some myths have been mentioned by Matt, some by Ambassador Burns, and I'll not repeat them. And I'll be a little bit provocative on purpose. Yesterday, Matt used Churchill's phrase about the riddle inside enigma. And there is one more very specific feature of Russia. All the time, it can surprise you, regardless of how well you do know what's going on. And the verse is the picture I'm eager to show you. Bigger is the chance for positive surprises in future. So let me start with saying that Russia now is a totally new country, and it's not necessarily to look at recent past to understand what exactly we should wait from here, because it did change in a very essential way. It did change in a way Putin is ruling this country. Until recently, we were saying that Putin is not a Tsar. He should represent views of major elite clans. Now it's not the case. Putin is much more like a Tsar in a sense that he cannot listen to his political elites, and they became much more dependent from him than he is dependent from them. Elite or ruling class did change in a very essential way as well. Until recently, it used to be a kind of hybrid between elite and old Soviet nomenclatura. Now it's transformed, and it took a shape of neo-nomenclatura, meaning that it became much less capable to make any independent moves. And society did change a lot as well. So there is old myth that Russia is ruled by bad rulers, and if to replace them by good rulers, the people is great and will be a great country. It's not exactly the case, and Russia is a good illustration of the point that each nation deserves its rulers. And now I would say that Russian people look like drunk, not only in effect that they did increase their support to what the government is doing, including in Ukraine, by 20 percentage points, but when being asked about major problems the country is faced by, like, say, corruption, like inequality and some other problems, their feeling that these problems are serious are much less so, by the same 20 percentage points. So it's like drunk person who feels like, in Russian there is expression that the sea is very shallow. We do have international experts group working on scenarios for Russia's future, and this is good illustration of how these scenarios and our views about this on these scenarios are changing all the time. This graph has been published 3 years ago at a time when it was still unknown whether Putin will choose monocentric power or will keep tandem with Mr. Medvedev. And not only it shows that from our experts' view, the move to monocentric power was inevitable, but it does show this idea, well, it does illustrate this idea of unpredictable future as well as past, and look at worst case scenario. It's called Stalin light scenario. Now it looks like this is dream scenario, the best possible option for present-day Russia. The whole political machinery now is different. And what is important is the fact that Russia has very primitive political engine, which has been designed at a time of huge financial well-being, when it looked like we should not think a lot about how to fix this or that problem. We can fix it using money. It's no more the case. The country is faced by much more complicated problems, but it moved to an even more primitive political system, and it can be easily illustrated by this political geometry thing. So we do have very mechanical construction with Putin at the very top. The gravity center is very high, meaning that the system is very unstable with regard to any moves from outside as well as from inside. And there is very long distance between elites and society, and between elites and the leader. And there are numerous conflicts emerging among elites, and I'll tell a few words about them a little later. In my view, the origin of what we've witnessed last year is connected with huge legitimacy crisis Putin has felt after he was re-elected in 2012. He did manage to win in elections, but he didn't manage to increase his legitimacy, and he should do something in order to do this. And that time, especially on May 6, 2012, when huge anti-Putin's meeting took place on Bolotnaya Square, it made him clear that the former system of buying loyalty in exchange of increasing life level did not work anymore, and he should do something. There were two choices: either to liberalize political and economic system, or to use a mobilization model. And in my view, the basic choice was the choice in favor of mobilization model, which is responsible for several other choices which can be seen as irreversible. For the first time in his political career, Putin made moves which are absolutely irreversible. So the second important choice was the choice from a hybrid regime to full-scale authoritarian one, from an empire to a nation state, and from soft power to hard power. And it did change political system in a very essential way. I would say now that Putin is no more a subject who can make political decisions which can change the trajectory of the country's development. He's rather an object. Whatever he does now, he cannot change trajectory, which can be described and was shown at previous slide as a plane in tailspin. We can use another image of a spiral going out, but what is good with a kind of plane image is the fact that we should differ between pilot, crew, and passengers. So the pilot no more is capable to change trajectory of his plane. And here I am coming to this mobilization instead of liberalization choice. In case of economy, it works not well, but it works. It's weak, but not fragile. In case of politics, it combines weakness and fragility, and it gave certain benefits, including increasing legitimacy of the regime. The problem is connected with the fact that no more Putin can switch to electoral to democratic legitimacy because he did choose military mobilization kind of legitimacy, and in order to keep it, he should demonstrate either military victories or he should develop this rhetoric of a besieged fortress, and we do see clear signs of this. This is very important scheme as well, because it shows that no more authorities are interested to keep democratic window dressing. And it's clearly seen in case of elections, it's clearly seen in case of rule of law and all other things. And what is more important with regard to the political system and its prospects for future, it's the fact that we do have now near nomenclatura system. This is an old word used for Stalin's system, where your role in the system was totally defined by your administrative position. And when losing this position, you should wait not only the property you could control, but your influence over decision making. Now we do have something similar, and it makes any subordinate absolutely loyal to his boss. It makes time horizon pretty short, because instead of thinking in terms of what is good for the country, what is bad for the country, everybody within this system thinks in terms of demonstrating his or her loyalty to immediate boss, and it means also dominance of vertical connections over any horizontal connections. Look at what was going on last year. Well, once again, it was demonstrated that not only ministers and deputy prime ministers and prime ministers are appointed by the system, but it was demonstrated also that oligarchs, so-called private businessmen, are appointed by the system and can be replaced in case of their disloyalty. And I would refer to the image shown yesterday by Matt when comparing Igor Sechin, the very influential member of Putin's close circle, who runs Rosneft, the huge state company, and who is a very influential guy, and Mikhail Khodorkovsky. So in my view, these two men illustrate pretty well the difference between neo-nomenclatura system, where Putin can appoint an oligarch, and Igor Sechin is clearly one of the most influential oligarchs in the country, and elite system, when Khodorkovsky tried to establish his independent company, which could be independent from Russian government. And the clear message sent by Putin in 2003 was that it wasn't due to their effectiveness, but it was due to the fact that these oligarchs got private property from the state and they should be loyal to the state. Hard power instead of soft power, it's very understandable issue when choosing hard power, being unable to fix problems with, say, Ukraine and its probable integration into Eurasian Union by means of soft power. The Kremlin did cut off any opportunity in near future to use soft power, and its opportunities to use hard power are very limited as well, which brings me to another choice made in favor of the nation state. And what is important when dealing with Russia, we can see moves in very different, including opposite directions. But the general direction, I think, is direction of building the nation state, and it puts an end of all imperial ambitions outside Russia due to understandable reasons. And look at Belarus and Kazakhstan, which are absolutely not eager to go on in direction of further political integration with Russia, but it brings understandable problems within Russia, because Russia itself is still remainder of old Soviet empire, with certain parts of Russia being not Russian in ethnic sense, and thus I think the problem of Russia's own disintegration, especially in case of Caucasus, is absolutely inevitable, as well as the clash between two nationalisms, Russian ethnic nationalism and anti-Russian ethnic nationalism. And Putin unleashed very powerful beast, nationalism, and I doubt that he can keep controlling this beast. And the situation can develop in a very bad way, like in case of Gorbachev and perestroika. It can be called Putin and anti-perestroika, when those forces unleashed by the leader pushing the leader in certain direction until he is not able to lead and he is pushed out by these forces. I do have 3 slides on Putin's elites, but I don't think it's needed here to tell this story in details. What is important is the fact that Putin's elite system or Putin's neo-nomenclatura system can be described as big corporation where Putin serves the role of the board chairman and of CEO. And the fact that now there is the vision that he's surrounded more by Siloviki guys should be not taken as an illustration of the point that Putin's oligarchs are playing not important role. They made the general decision. Now this decision should be realized by loyal servants, by Siloviki, and that's why Putin, as a commander-in-chief of the nation at war, is all the time dealing with these Siloviki guys instead of major stockholders who are responsible for all these recent decisions and shifts made by Russia. Just a few words about the public sphere, which is under threat, and the state of Russian society is not that good, but this is about the next slide. So when the country is at war and the vision of a besieged fortress should be developed, it's pretty natural to start witch hunt, to look for a 5th column, to use words like national traitors, and there were a lot of comments on the fact that Putin used words the same as Hitler in past when describing opponents. Foreign agents is very important shift which marginalize good portion of civil society, which is considered to be at the opposite side. We do have much bigger control over media, although it's not state control, but it's Putin's elites control, and internet is under pressure as well. And not to leave the image that the ruler is bad, but society is good, I would show you this image of Russian society, where we do see many important things, like, say, the state is interested to develop paternalistic model in state-to-society relations. But the backside of this model, the backside of paternalism, is the vision or the idea that so-called state interests should dominate over any individual interests, and somebody like Putin or anybody else should be responsible for formulating these state interests. There is strong anti-Western sentiment, and you can look at sociological polls to see how the West, including the United States, is perceived by Russian society. And although there are a lot of speculations that in general, in authoritarian regime, you cannot trust to sociological polls, but in this particular issue, when being asked whether you do see in the United States the biggest enemy of Russia, I think that answers are pretty sincere. And the problem I see is connected with the fact that Russian society was trying to transform from Soviet society to a new democratic society. And it's like going across the desert for 25 years, and now it's back. So we lost all these 25 years of positive post-Soviet transformation of the society, and will take another 25 years at least to compensate for this loss and for the degradation of social capital. Well, I should not perhaps speculate. Well, let me say a few words. This image appeared in Sevastopol. It's the wall with Putin's image. This is the attempt to evaluate benefits and costs of taking Crimea in, more or less scientific way. And there are many problems connected with Crimea, including very important one with Crimean Tatars, which is the nation punished by Stalin and sent out of the Crimea to Central Asia. They were not allowed to come back, unlike other ethnic groups at the time of the Soviet Union. And it was only at the time of Ukraine when they were allowed to come back. That's why they do feel pretty positively with regard to Ukraine, although Ukraine all the time was using Crimean Tatars as a playing card between Russian ethnic majority in Crimea and Ukrainian ethnic minority. But now we see almost the attitude toward Crimean Tatars almost similar to Stalin attitude when Putin at first tried to buy support of leaders of Crimean Tatars. They did refuse. They were pushed out and they are not allowed to come back to Crimea as part of Russia in course of 5 years. I do speak about Mustafa Dzhemilov, the leader of Crimean Tatars Mezhelis, and Rifat Chubarov, who is his deputy. And Putin deals with Crimean Tatars and their organizations just like he deals with political parties in Russia. So the Kremlin established another organization which should oppose Mezhelis, which is not very pro-Russian. And this problem is becoming bigger and bigger. The total number of Crimean Tatars is not that big. It's about 200,000, which makes them 10% of the Crimean population, but they are very active and very well organized. I'll switch to challenges and solutions. And the radical transformation which took place last year of the political regime did help Putin to fix his legitimacy problem for a while, but it didn't fix those problems which are very important, and Russia is faced by these problems now just like it has been faced in past, although the state of these problems is worse. So I would name 3 major problems from my view which did exist in past and which still exist now. The explosion at Caucasus. And this is very peculiar that now at a time when Ukraine became the major focus of Russian media, Caucasus looks like pacified, but it's not the case. And it still is the major problem for the country. Then there is poor management. The system is closed. There is lack of public competition, and the management is declining all the time. So although Putin did manage to reintroduce certain important features of old Stalin nomenclatura system, the only problem is that his system cannot reproduce itself. It's pretty old, and look at Putin's near circle. It consists of persons of his age, 62 plus minus 5 years. So it puts very understandable physical limit for this system, because unlike in Brezhnev times when we could have almost mad Secretary General, but they were strong institutions, and he could rule until the very physical end. In case of Putin, it's very different. The system needs manual management all the time, so it needs very attentive leadership. It needs very capable leadership in order to fix all these problems on a daily basis. So, and there are some new challenges which appeared due to all these recent shifts. The biggest one I did already mention is how to maintain legitimacy, and it leads me to the conclusion that if military victories are no more possible in scale of Crimea, then tough rhetoric should develop, and then repressions which are going on step by step are absolutely inevitable. There are fights within elites, not only between major clans due to understandable reasons. Economy is shrinking, pie to be shared by them is shrinking, and the fight between them for these pieces of this pie is intensifying. But there is also the tension between the top and the medium level of elites, because top level of elites fixed their problem of keeping in power, and that's great. They lost perhaps share of their wealth, but it's not that visible if you are losing 2 billion out of 10. But medium level elite is in a very different position because they lost the way of life they experienced for many years. They were getting good money in Russia, but they were spending this money at Côte d'Azur and some other nice places where they do have property and so on. No more it's possible. And recently the new order came that police guys are not allowed to go abroad at all, regardless of their rank. And in my view, it means that this is a very temporary decision because the system doesn't have anything to compensate for these losses, so they can force elites not to, to sacrifice somehow, but for a while, not forever. And Eastern Ukraine is a very serious problem for Russia because Putin is very limited in his moves, and the hammer is Russian nationalism and the opportunity to be called a traitor in case of cutting off support to rebels, and between the West and sanctions. And this is a very complicated position, and I doubt that he can keep this balance for long. Not to speak about the fact that, in my view, Russia is absolutely not interested in any kind of solution. Because imagine if all those guys which are taking place in military actions in Ukraine will come back to Russia, I doubt that they will be happy to return to their very subordinated positions of guards in shops and somewhere else. And they will come with weapons, and it will create very serious threat for Russia domestically. Now coming to good news. So I did describe Russia's trajectory as a plane in a tailspin. And in my view, we should not speak about 2018 presidential elections and whether Putin would be eager to participate or not. They do have, and I'm passenger, we do have something in between 1.5 to 2 years left, and I think that it's pretty well known to the pilot and to the crew. And then there are two different options. One is to fall apart in the air or to hit the ground. Both options are good, and let me explain. I'll explain them a little later, but I would like to emphasize that Putin's calculations are pretty short-term calculations. So it's pretty understandable for him. He's a good businessman, by the way. So it's pretty understandable for him that Russia cannot survive economically under existing sanctions, not to speak about the possibility of intensifying sanctions. So travel ban for elites is another temporary measure which can work for a while, but not forever. And the general situation in elites, I mean, disbalance connected with the fact that, well, military and law enforcement guys are playing more and more important role. I mean, aging and impossibility for the system to reproduce itself. And now I am coming to scenarios. So the first one is to fall apart in the air. It's a regime without Putin, when the crew decides to change trajectory and to bring the head of the leader in order to be allowed to do this. So it means the political crisis and large-scale regime transformation. But in this case, they will they will transform regime in a very essential way, but they will keep themselves at the expense of Putin, if only being capable to do this. The second scenario is Russia without Putin, its collapse. It's the plane hitting the ground. And it's not a good option, and I'll tell a few words why it's not that good. And the third scenario, and I do think Putin is clearly in favor of this scenario, is Putin's lucky chance. The balance is very unstable due to dynamism of major processes. Not only Russia is experiencing troubles, but Ukraine is experiencing even bigger troubles, politically and economically. And European Union is faced by very serious troubles, including those partly inspired by Putin, who is eager to support anti-European Union parties and so on. So it can change the environment, and it can be a kind of external shock which will lead the plane to avoid this tailspin trajectory and to change its trajectory under Putin. So, if Putin is over, the life can hardly be better after Putin than we do have now, due to many different reasons. The first one is degradation, total degradation of all institutions. It looked a year ago that Russia had very weak institutions. They became much weaker in course of 2014. Then there is degradation of elites. Recently, the former Prime Minister of Russia, academician Primakov, came with the idea that we should decentralize our country and should let regional elites to play the role they played in the 90s, keeping political stability when the federal level got weak and not capable to keep in power. It can no more work in Russia due to degradation of regional elites in the course of last 15 years, because we do not have direct and competitive elections in regions, and governors who are loyal to the Kremlin are not effective in terms of keeping relations with political elites in general. And instead of being highest representatives of regional political elites at the center, they became highest representatives of the center in regions. That's why the scheme which worked in the 90s is no more able to keep political stability. Then there is degradation of the society, and I did try to explain this to you, and in my view, we could easily lose post-Soviet generation. There were calculations that those who were grown up after the Soviet Union should not have the same problems with mentality as my generation and previous generations, but it looks now like they're poisoned, and they will come through hangover, and it will be for the first time, and I'm not sure that they will be able to recover. And the last point is connected with nationalists and other organized forces. If to imagine that power is on the ground, due to Putin's absence. And it's easy to imagine, and the problem is that there are no more institutions, there are no more politicians if Putin is out, because present-day politicians are like moons, which do reflect Putin's popularity and Putin's legitimacy, and if Putin's legitimacy disappears, they do disappear as well. And the force which can come to power should be well organized. It should not be the biggest one, if to remember 1917. It should be well organized. And I do see only two options in this case. One is law enforcement, certain factions within law enforcement, together with hard nationalists, and this combination is hardly better than what we do have now. And the second opportunity is Ramzan Kadyrov, who is the leader of the second authoritarian regime in the country. And when speaking about Russia, we should understand that there are two authoritarian regimes, one led by Putin and another one absolutely separate, led by Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, who is very strong and influential guy. And recently, 3 weeks ago, there was the meeting of 20,000 armed policemen in Grozny, which promised to realize Putin's and Kadyrov's order in any part of the world. And Chechenians are playing very actively in Ukrainian conflict at both sides, and it can be them who will try at least, or whether they can be used by the system to protect the system, or they can try to play their own game. And with saying this, I'd like to find some reasons to be optimistic, to demonstrate you some reasons to be optimistic. The major one is that political time is running much faster now, and there is a good Russian expression that the horrible end is better than endless horror. So we are coming to this phase in our political development. And the second reason to be optimistic, I think, is connected with the fact that no more it depends from Putin. No more we should be focused on his intentions, of his mysterious soul, or what exactly he plans. He's very limited in his actions. He keeps full power within the plane, which is bad for those who are within. But he's very limited outside this plane, and he cannot change its trajectory. And if only the crew wants to survive, then they should replace their pilot. So to formulate this in other way, I would say that Russia became hostage of the regime. Regime in turn became hostage of Putin, and Putin is hostage of those moves he made in 2014, and these moves are absolutely irreversible. Thank you.